Welcome to Warming Tales Frias. Today we delve into a compelling story about Amina Grant, a determined woman who must confront prejudice and defy the odds in a world that often underestimates her. When a moment of misunderstanding spirals into a battle for respect, Amina's courage shines through as she fights for justice, not just for herself, but for others as well. Get ready for a journey filled with resilience, empowerment, and the transformative power of standing up against bias. If this story resonates with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. Let's embark on this important journey together.
The private jet terminal buzzed with quiet sophistication. Marble floors gleamed under soft pendant lighting, and the distant hum of engines filled the air. Business executives in sharp suits and socialites with designer bags floated through the space, exuding effortless importance. Amid the luxury, Naomi Grant stepped inside, her calm yet commanding presence drawing attention without a single word. She wore a tailored navy blazer and wide-legged trousers, her natural curls softly framing her face. Her almond-shaped eyes, sharp yet warm, scanned the terminal. There was no need for flashy jewelry or extravagant displays. Her sleek leather carry-on and tablet spoke volumes. For Naomi, subtlety had always been her greatest asset. Her success didn't shout, it whispered. As she approached the check-in desk, a young attendant with a bright smile greeted her. "Good morning, ma'am. May I assist you?" the woman asked, her tone cheerful and professional. "Yes, thank you," Naomi replied evenly. "I'm here for the Grant flight to Zurich." The attendant's eyes flicked to her screen. "Of course, Miss Grant. Everything is in order. Your jet is being prepped, and the captain will meet you shortly." Naomi gave a small nod and stepped aside, letting her gaze wander. This flight was critical, not just for her, but for the entire team waiting in Switzerland. The upcoming negotiations could secure a partnership that would elevate her luxury goods company across Europe, a milestone she'd worked relentlessly to achieve. Moments later, Naomi spotted a man crossing the terminal in a crisp pilot's uniform. His shoulders were squared, his movements purposeful, but his expression carried a guarded edge. Captain Eric Dalton was the picture of professionalism, but Naomi instantly sensed something hidden beneath the surface, something less polished. She turned to greet him as he approached. "Captain Dalton, I presume," Naomi said, extending her hand. Eric's eyes flicked to her hand briefly before accepting it, his grip firm, almost dismissive. "Miss Grant, I assume?" His voice carried a polite veneer, but the way his eyes subtly scanned her from head to toe betrayed a lingering doubt. Naomi caught it immediately. The slight curl of his mouth, the narrowed gaze. She'd seen this before. "That's correct," she answered, unbothered by the subtext. "I trust everything is ready for our departure." Eric hesitated, his glance shifting toward the check-in clerk as if seeking silent confirmation. Yes. Though I must admit we don't often have private clients like you," he said, his words hanging uncomfortably between them. Naomi raised an eyebrow, her voice cool. "Clients like me?" she repeated, her tones soft but cutting. Eric gave a faint shrug, his lips curling into a smirk. "You know, it's not typical. Most of our private jet owners, well, they come from a certain background." Her gaze didn't waver. "Different how?" "Well, no offense," Eric said, avoiding her eyes now, "but most people in this space fit a particular profile." He let the thought trail off, but his meaning couldn't have been clearer. The check-in clerk's smile faltered. The air around them tightened. Naomi's expression remained calm, but something colder flickered behind her eyes. "I see," she said quietly, "and this observation is based on what exactly?" Eric shifted uncomfortably. Too late, he realized he'd crossed into dangerous territory. "Oh, I didn't mean anything by it," he said quickly. "It's just, I wasn't expecting the jet owner to be here in person." Naomi crossed her arms, her gaze sharp. "Captain Dalton, let me clarify. I am not only present, but I am the sole owner of this aircraft. If there's an issue, I suggest you speak plainly." Eric's smirk faded, replaced by a tight-lipped nod. "No issue," he muttered, though his tone told a different story. "I'll begin pre-flight checks." As he turned to leave, Naomi's voice halted him. "Captain?" He paused, glancing back. "Let's change Leonard Hale's name to Marcus Reed to keep the continuity of renaming characters throughout the story." Eric glanced back, his jaw tightening, as Naomi Grant's words echoed behind him. "Be sure you're fully prepared," she said coolly. "I have no tolerance for unprofessionalism." Her calm but pointed remark lingered in the air, heavy like a thrown gauntlet. Eric nodded stiffly and walked away, though his rigid posture betrayed his frustration. Naomi exhaled softly, her fingers tightening around the handle of her carry-on. This wasn't new. She'd faced doubts and condescension before, but today, when so much hinged on her success, she wouldn't let ignorance undermine her. A glance at her watch reminded her the jet would be ready soon. And when it was, another battle would unfold, one she had no intention of losing. Naomi strode toward the private lounge, her heels clicking with deliberate precision against the marble floor. The lounge was designed as a sanctuary for the elite. Soft leather chairs, warm ambient lighting, and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee curating an atmosphere of exclusivity. But for Naomi, today it felt different. The elegance masked something uglier, something she was all too familiar with. She sank into a chair by the window, setting her carry-on beside her and pulling out her tablet. As her finger hovered over the screen, scanning the final draft of her presentation for Zurich, her mind couldn't fully detach from her earlier encounter with Captain Dalton. Her career had made her fluent in the subtle language of prejudice. It wasn't always loud. Sometimes it lurked in quick glances, in careful wording, in the hesitation before a handshake. Eric Dalton's demeanor had been no different. The young lounge attendant who had greeted Naomi earlier quietly approached, her polite smile still present but undercut by something cautious. "Miss Grant," she said, folding her hands nervously. "Can I offer you anything while you wait? Coffee, tea, or water?" Naomi's gaze lifted from the screen, softening as she noted the attendant's discomfort. "A coffee would be lovely. Thank you," Naomi replied, her tone light and reassuring. The attendant nodded, about to retreat, but Naomi gently called after her. "Excuse me, what's your name?" The woman paused, clearly surprised by the question. After a brief hesitation, she offered a small smile. "It's Mia, ma'am." "Thank you, Mia," Naomi said warmly. "I appreciate your professionalism." Mia's eyes lit up, and the tension in her shoulders eased. "Of course, ma'am. I'll bring it right away." As Mia disappeared into the kitchenette, Naomi's attention drifted back to the tarmac. The jet gleamed under the sunlight, a sleek marvel of engineering. Every inch of it symbolized her grit and sacrifice. She had spent years building her company, battling doubters, setbacks, and prejudice to reach this point. And yet, even with all she had achieved, her place still seemed to require justification. The soft vibration of her phone snapped her from her thoughts. Naomi glanced down to see Marcus Reed's name flashing on the screen. A faint smile tugged at her lips as she answered. "Marcus," she greeted, leaning back in her seat. "Calling with good news, I hope?" His deep, jovial voice came through the line, a grounding presence. "Always, Naomi. I wanted to confirm. Everything's ready for Zurich. The partners can't wait to see your pitch." "They won't be disappointed," Naomi replied confidently. But despite the reassurance, a flicker of irritation resurfaced as she thought about Eric. "Though, I might need to handle a small complication first." A pause followed. "Complication?" Marcus asked, his tone sharpening. "What kind of complication?" Naomi's gaze fell back on the jet. "Let's just say the captain has some outdated ideas about who belongs in this terminal," she said flatly. Marcus let out a long sigh. "Do you need me to step in?" "No," Naomi replied firmly. "I can manage, but stay ready in case this escalates." "Always," Marcus said without hesitation. "Just say the word." "Thank you, Marcus," Naomi said, her voice softening. "I'll keep you posted." Ending the call, she set her phone down and refocused on the jet outside. It no longer just represented luxury or business, it felt like a battlefield. And Naomi had no intention of losing ground. A few minutes later, Mia returned, carefully balancing a tray with a steaming cup of coffee and sugar cubes. "Here you go, ma'am," Mia said, setting the tray on the table with practiced grace. "Thank you, Mia," Naomi said with a gentle smile. As Mia turned to leave, Naomi called out again. "And Mia?" Mia paused, glancing over her shoulder. "Yes, ma'am?" Naomi met her gaze with quiet intensity. "If anyone ever questions your place or your worth, don't let them intimidate you, understand?" Mia blinked, surprise flickering across her features before settling into quiet appreciation. "I understand. Thank you, ma'am." Naomi nodded, watching Mia leave with a sense of reassurance. This fight wasn't just about her, it was about the quiet battles fought every day by people like Mia, by anyone who had ever been underestimated. Mia blinked, a mix of surprise and gratitude flickering across her face. "I will, ma'am. Thank you," she said softly. Naomi Grant watched as Mia disappeared into the lounge, the weight of her own words lingering in the air. She sipped her coffee slowly, letting its warmth fortify her resolve. Captain Eric Dalton's attitude wasn't just about her. It was a reflection of something much larger, something Naomi had faced more times than she cared to count. But not today. Today, she wouldn't let it go unanswered. Moments later, movement at the far end of the lounge caught Naomi's attention. She looked up to see Eric back near the gate, his expression tense as he spoke in hushed tones to another uniformed staff member. The younger man nodded quickly, his demeanor uneasy as Eric gestured toward the jet parked outside. Naomi placed her cup down gently, smoothing the fabric of her blazer as she rose. It was time to face this storm directly. Her steps were deliberate as she approached them. Eric noticed her almost immediately, his posture stiffening. His gaze darkened, but Naomi met it head-on, unwavering. "Miss Grant," Eric said, his tone clipped. "I was just finalizing preparations for the flight." Naomi tilted her head slightly, studying him with a calm intensity. "I see," she replied. "And do those preparations include questioning my authority as the owner of this aircraft?" Eric's jaw tensed. He straightened, but the subtle crack in his confidence betrayed him. "I don't know what you mean," he said quickly. Naomi stepped closer, her voice dropping to a tone that left no room for misunderstanding. "Oh, I think you do, Captain Dalton, and I suggest you choose your next words carefully, because how you proceed will determine whether you're still employed by the time this plane leaves the tarmac." For the first time, Eric faltered. The confidence he had worn earlier, like armor, now seemed thin, fragile beneath the weight of Naomi's unflinching gaze. Silence stretched between them. Behind Eric, the younger crew member shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between them. Naomi could feel the attention of others nearby as the hum of the lounge quieted. "I assure you, Miss Grant," Eric began, irritation laced in his voice. "I'm simply doing my job. Ensuring the safety and integrity of this flight is my top priority, and Naomi raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "I respect the importance of your role, Captain," she said firmly. "But let's not pretend this is about safety. This is about your inability to accept that someone like me owns this jet." Eric opened his mouth to protest, but Naomi wasn't finished. "I've provided the required documentation. My presence here is fully authorized. If you had legitimate concerns, you should have addressed them professionally, not through dismissive remarks and veiled insinuations." Eric's shoulders squared, but Naomi caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The crew member behind him took a small step back, clearly not wanting to be caught in the middle of the exchange. "I don't appreciate being accused of something I didn't do," Eric said, his voice rising. "I treat all clients with respect." Naomi arched an eyebrow, her lips curving into a faint, incredulous smile. "Respect?" she echoed, her voice soft but cutting. "Is that what you call questioning my ownership? Refusing to believe I belong here? Captain, if that's your version of respect, I'd hate to see what the alternative looks like." Her words hit like a hammer. Eric's face flushed and he glanced around as if searching for someone to back him up. But the terminal staff kept their distance, avoiding eye contact. The soft murmur of conversations in the lounge had stilled, the weight of the confrontation drawing silent attention. "I'm just following protocol," Eric muttered, his tone defensive. "No need to make this personal." Naomi took another step forward, closing the space between them. "Oh, but it is personal, Captain," she said quietly, her calmness somehow more unsettling than raised voices could ever be. "It became personal the moment you decided I didn't fit into your narrow idea of who should own a private jet. And let me be clear, I will not tolerate being treated as less than anyone else here. Not by you, not by anyone." Eric's gaze faltered. For a fleeting second, the bravado he clung to so tightly crumbled, but he quickly adjusted his stance, squaring his shoulders. "Miss Grant," he began, his voice forcibly even, "I assure you this is all a misunderstanding. I'll ensure your flight proceeds without further issue." Naomi studied him for a long moment, searching his expression. She saw the cracks, the forced politeness barely masking his resentment. "Good," she said finally, her voice cool but decisive. "I'll hold you to that. But understand this. What happened here will be documented and reported to your superiors. If you think this can be swept aside, you're mistaken. Eric's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt nod. Understood. Naomi didn't wait for further acknowledgement. She turned on her heel, walking back toward the lounge with the same measured steps that had carried her into the confrontation. She could feel the weight of every gaze on her back, but she didn't look back. Eric Dalton's confidence might have cracked, but Naomi knew this wasn't over. The battle had only just begun. Naomi Grant regarded Eric Dalton for a long moment, her sharp eyes peeling back the thin layers of forced professionalism he wore. She saw the resentment beneath it, the unspoken resistance that lingered just below his carefully measured words. But this wasn't over. Not yet. I'll hold you to that, Naomi said, her voice soft but firm, steel wrapped in silk. Understand this, Captain. This will be reported to your superiors. If you think this ends as a misunderstanding, you're mistaken. Eric's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt nod. Understood. Naomi turned sharply, walking away with purpose. She didn't need to look back to know the room's eyes were on her, drawn to the calm but resolute way she had handled the confrontation. Tension lingered like static in the air, unresolved and heavy. Returning to her seat, Naomi set her tablet on the table and gazed out the window, but her focus had shifted entirely. The exchange replayed in her mind, every word, every glance, every micro-expression from Eric. The pilot's hostility wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a broader narrative, one Naomi had grown all too familiar with. And yet, even with her success, the battle for respect was never truly over. Her coffee sat untouched, the warmth fading as her thoughts churned. The soft buzz of her phone interrupted her focus. She glanced down. Marcus Reed. Marcus, everything okay? Want me to step in? A faint smile tugged at Naomi's lips as she read the message. His unwavering support was always there, a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone in this. Naomi handled it for now. Keep your phone close in case I need backup. His response was immediate. Marcus. Always. Call if you need me. Naomi set the phone down, exhaling deeply. She wouldn't allow Eric's behavior to derail her focus. The Zurich deal was far too important. This was a milestone not just for her, but for the company she had built from the ground up. Near the kitchenette, Mia quietly watched the scene unfold. Though she was distant enough to avoid being noticed, she had heard enough. Her admiration for Naomi had only grown. Mia had seen entitled passengers and difficult situations before, but Naomi's calm strength was unlike anything she'd witnessed. As Mia wiped the counter, her gaze drifted toward Eric. The captain was now speaking in hushed tones to a younger crew member near the gate. Eric's gestures were sharp and impatient, while the other man's posture was tense, his eyes flicking nervously toward the lounge where Naomi sat. Mia's chest tightened. Even from across the room, she could sense that Eric wasn't finished. Naomi, seated with her tablet open, appeared relaxed, but Mia knew better. There was a storm beneath that calm exterior. Naomi's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she began typing an email, an incident report to the CEO of the aviation company. The words flowed with precision, stripped of emotion but heavy with facts. Her ownership, Eric's dismissiveness, and the implications of his behavior. This wasn't just about her. It was about holding people accountable. As she pressed send, Naomi leaned back, her resolve solidifying. Eric Dalton didn't realize it yet, but the price for his prejudice would be higher than he anticipated. Across the terminal, the air grew quieter. The coffee on Naomi's table had long gone cold, but she barely noticed. The jet outside shimmered in the late morning light, a reflection of her hard-earned success. But inside the terminal, tension simmered like an oncoming storm. Eric was still nearby. Naomi could feel it, the weight of his unresolved frustration hovering like distant thunder. Her patience, though vast, wasn't infinite. She had given him a chance to correct course. Now she waited to see if he would rise to the occasion, or dig himself deeper into the hole he had begun to carve. Her phone buzzed again. Marcus, any updates? Do I need to step in? Naomi's response was quick. Naomi? Not yet, but I have a feeling this isn't over. Stand by. She set the phone down, her eyes drifting back to the jet. Its sleek lines cut against the sky like a monument to everything she had built, everything no one could take from her. Near the gate, Eric stood with the younger crew member, his voice low but sharp. I don't get why you're pushing this, the younger man said nervously. His eyes flicked to the lounge. She's got all the paperwork. She's the owner. Eric's jaw clenched, his lips tightening into a thin line. That doesn't mean anything, he muttered. Eric Dalton's voice cut sharply through the subdued terminal, his frustration barely concealed. People forge documents all the time. Do you really think someone like her owns a jet like that? Come on. The younger crew member standing beside him hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. His eyes flickered toward Naomi Grant, seated calmly across the lounge, focused on her tablet. Marcus Reed vouched for her, the younger man said quietly. You know who he is, right? If he's backing her. I don't care who's backing her, Eric snapped, his voice slicing through the air. I've been flying private jets for 15 years. I know the kind of people who own planes like this. She doesn't fit the profile. The younger crew member glanced away, clearly uneasy. Maybe it's not about the profile, Captain. Maybe it's about the fact that she earned it. Eric scoffed, his expression hardening. Earned it? Please. She probably inherited it or married into it. Either way, I'm not letting this slide without a proper explanation. From her position near the kitchenette, Mia listened quietly, her hands instinctively tightening around the cloth she was using to clean the counter. She'd overheard enough to piece together what was happening, and her stomach twisted uneasily. Eric wasn't going to let this go. His prejudice, thinly veiled at best, was beginning to boil over into something uglier and harder to ignore. Mia's eyes flicked toward Naomi. From all appearances, she seemed unaware of the escalating whispers. Her poise hadn't wavered once since the first encounter with Eric. Mia admired that. Still, she felt a pang of guilt for not stepping in more forcefully. Naomi's calm strength had made a deep impression on her, but as a low-ranking staff member, Mia's influence felt limited. Yet, something about this moment felt bigger than her job description. This wasn't just a disagreement over protocol. It was about fairness, respect, and standing up when the lines between professionalism and bias blurred. Mia clenched her fists, debating her next move, but the decision was made for her as Eric strode briskly toward Naomi once again. Naomi looked up, locking eyes with him as he stopped at her table. Her posture straightened, tablet placed neatly on the surface beside her. Miss Grant, Eric began, his voice clipped. I've spoken with my crew, and while your documentation seems to be in order, I still have concerns. Naomi raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Stop, she said firmly, her tone steady but unmistakably final. Eric faltered, caught off guard by the sudden interruption. We've already had this conversation, Captain Dalton, Naomi continued, her voice calm but edged with unmistakable authority. I'm not going to entertain it any further. But, no, she cut him off, sharper this time. You've made your assumptions, you've voiced your doubts, and you've wasted more than enough of my time. Eric's face flushed, but Naomi rose to her feet, her presence seeming to expand beyond her frame. Though she wasn't physically imposing, something about the unwavering way she carried herself left no room for challenge. This jet is mine, Naomi said clearly, her voice lowering to a level that demanded attention. I earned it through years of resilience, hard work, and sacrifice. She stepped closer, her eyes boring into his. And let me remind you, Captain, you are here to fly the plane, not to act as a gatekeeper deciding who deserves to sit in it. Eric opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. The quiet strength in Naomi's gaze unraveled whatever confidence he'd managed to hold on to. If you cannot accept that, Naomi said, her voice soft but cutting, then I will have you replaced before this flight leaves the ground. And believe me, your behavior will be fully documented and forwarded to the highest levels of your company. The color drained from Eric's face. For the first time, Naomi saw genuine recognition in his eyes, a realization that the situation had spiraled far beyond his control. Yes, ma'am, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Naomi held his gaze for a lingering moment, ensuring the weight of her words settled. Good, she said finally. I suggest you focus on preparing for takeoff. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, her steps measured and precise. Behind her, Eric stood frozen, his bravado shattered. His future with the company now dangled by a thread. As Naomi settled back into her seat, she allowed herself the smallest breath of relief. The confrontation was over, but the weight of it lingered. These moments, while familiar, never became easier. Each chipped away at something deeper, a reminder of the battles she shouldn't have to fight but still did. Minutes later, Mia approached quietly, her face pale but determined. "Miss Grant," Mia said, her voice soft. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened. You didn't deserve that." Naomi looked up, her expression softening as she met Mia's nervous gaze. "Thank you, Mia," Naomi said warmly. "But don't apologize for someone else's ignorance. Just promise me one thing." Mia nodded quickly, her eyes wide. "Anything. Never let someone else's prejudice define you," Naomi said. "You're worth more than that." Mia swallowed hard, Naomi's words resonating deeply. "I promise." Naomi gave her a small smile before turning her attention back to the window. Outside, the jet gleamed under the sun, ready for takeoff. The sky was clear, and Naomi knew the path ahead would be too. Justice, she thought, had a way of finding its mark. The low hum of conversation filled the lounge, but beneath the surface, tension still rippled quietly, unspoken but undeniable. Naomi Grant gazed out through the large floor-to-ceiling window, her eyes resting on the jet that awaited her. The sun reflected off its polished exterior, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to take in the deeper meaning behind it. This aircraft wasn't just transportation, it was a symbol of her journey. A testament to resilience, to breaking barriers society had placed before her. Every rivet, every sleek wing represented what she had built through relentless perseverance. No one could take that from her. Near the gate, Eric Dalton stood apart from the rest of the crew. His arms crossed tightly over his chest, his stance rigid, and his expression stormy. Though he had reluctantly backed down from their earlier confrontation, the sting of it clearly lingered. The younger crew member from before cautiously approached him. "Captain, maybe you should just let this go," the younger man said softly, as if unsure he should voice the thought aloud. Eric's eyes snapped toward him, sharp and angry. "Let it go?" Eric hissed. "Do you have any idea what this looks like? How it makes me look?" The younger man hesitated, carefully weighing his words. "It makes you look like you're not handling this professionally," he replied at last. "Look, I don't know Miss Grant personally, but everything about her says she's legit. She's not someone you can just dismiss." Eric's lips pressed into a thin, unforgiving line. "It's not about that," Eric muttered. The younger man gave him a pointed look. "Isn't it?" Before Eric could respond, a terminal staff member approached, interrupting the exchange. "Captain Dalton," she said crisply, "Miss Grant has requested the final pre-flight checklist. Are you ready to proceed?" Eric's expression tightened, and for a fleeting moment it seemed he might argue. But after a brief pause, he gave a curt nod. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "I'll handle it." As the staff member walked away, Eric muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the younger man to catch. "She'll get what's coming to her." The younger crew member's eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing, his discomfort evident. Whatever Eric intended, it didn't sound good. Back in the lounge, Naomi's phone buzzed. This time, it wasn't Marcus. It was an email notification. Opening it, she saw a response from the CEO of Elite Aviation. Subject, Incident report, immediate attention required. From Christopher Ellis, CEO, Elite Aviation Services. "Dear Miss Grant, thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. Please rest assured that we take your concerns seriously. Captain Dalton's actions will be thoroughly investigated and appropriate measures will be taken to ensure such behavior is not repeated. Should you encounter any further issues, please do not hesitate to contact me directly. Your satisfaction and comfort are our top priorities. Sincerely, Christopher Ellis, Chief Executive Officer, Elite Aviation Services." Naomi read the email twice, her lips curving into a faint but satisfied smile. She appreciated the swift response, but she knew words were just the beginning. Real action was what mattered, and she intended to see this through until the very end. Minutes later, a terminal attendant approached her. The woman's posture was polite but slightly nervous. "Miss Grant," she said softly, "your jet is ready for boarding. If you'd like, I can escort you to the gate." Naomi rose gracefully, picking up her carry-on. "Thank you," she replied, her tone calm yet commanding. As they walked toward the gate, Naomi spotted Eric standing near the jet stairs. His posture was stiff, his expression stormy. Though he had stepped back earlier, it was clear he hadn't let the matter go. Naomi squared her shoulders, steeling herself. She approached him with deliberate steps, her eyes fixed on his. "Captain Dalton, Naomi said evenly, her voice carrying the weight of calm authority. Are we ready to proceed? Eric's jaw clenched, but he nodded. The jet is ready, he replied curtly. Naomi held his gaze for a lingering moment, then gestured toward the stairs. After you. Eric hesitated, clearly disliking the idea of being ordered by her, but with no excuse to delay, he climbed the stairs, his movements stiff and mechanical. Naomi followed, her expression unreadable. Inside the jet, the atmosphere was serene. The luxurious interior a stark contrast to the tension that still lingered between them. Eric disappeared into the cockpit without another word, leaving Naomi to settle into her seat. As the engines roared to life and the plane began to taxi, Naomi allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had won this round. There was no doubt about that. But the true victory would come in ensuring incidents like this didn't happen again. To her, or to anyone else bold enough to defy the narrow expectations of men like Eric Dalton. The wheels lifted from the ground, and Naomi leaned back in her seat as the weight of confrontation slowly drifted away. This flight wasn't just about business in Zurich. It was about flying toward a future where prejudice held no place in the sky, or anywhere else. As the jet climbed higher, the clouds outside parted, revealing an endless expanse of blue. Naomi Grant gazed out the window, allowing herself to take in the view. It was a reminder, she thought, of the limitless possibilities awaiting those who refuse to be bound by others' limitations. A soft smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Justice, after all, was only ever a matter of time. The jet leveled out at cruising altitude, and the hum of the engines faded into a steady, calming rhythm. The cabin's serene luxury contrasted the tension that still lingered in Naomi's thoughts. She sat by the window, her gaze drifting across the clouds below. The confrontation with Eric Dalton still hovered in her mind, not as a source of anger, but as a reminder of the work yet to be done. Taking a sip of sparkling water, Naomi allowed herself a moment to reflect. This trip to Zurich wasn't just about expanding her company, it was about continuing to prove she belonged in spaces many still believed were off-limits to people like her. Her phone vibrated softly on the armrest, pulling her back to the present. Marcus Reed's name lit up the screen. Naomi smiled faintly and answered. Marcus, she greeted. I take it you're calling for an update? Of course, Marcus replied, his familiar voice warm and steady. You know I can't sit still when there's drama brewing. Naomi chuckled softly, the tension easing just slightly. Well, the situation's been handled for now. We're in the air, and the pilot is no longer an immediate problem. Marcus's tone grew serious. I don't like the sound of for now. What happened? Naomi recounted the events calmly, her voice measured as she detailed Eric's behavior and the confrontation that followed. Marcus listened intently, his occasional hums of disapproval the only interruption. When she finished, Marcus exhaled deeply. You handled that with your usual grace, he said. But I can't believe he had the audacity to question you like that. It's infuriating. It is, Naomi agreed, her tone steady, but it's nothing new. You and I both know people like Eric exist in every industry. The important thing is holding them accountable. And you plan to, Marcus added knowingly. Naomi's gaze shifted out the window, her voice firm. Absolutely. I've already reported the incident to Elite Aviation's CEO. I'll follow up to make sure it isn't swept under the rug. Eric Dalton needs to understand that actions have consequences. Marcus chuckled softly, admiration in his voice. That's why I always say you'd make a hell of a lawyer. You don't back down. Naomi smiled faintly. I fight because I have to, Marcus. For myself and for everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. As the call ended, Naomi placed her phone aside and leaned back into her seat. A few moments later, the flight attendant, a young man with a professional yet slightly nervous demeanor, approached quietly. Miss Grant, he said, his hands clasped in front of him. Is there anything I can get you? More water, perhaps, or a snack? Naomi glanced up at him, her expression softening. Thank you, she said, her tone warm. Water will be fine for now. The attendant, clearly relieved, nodded quickly and retreated. Naomi could sense his unease. He had likely witnessed the earlier tension with Eric. It wasn't uncommon. Many people didn't know how to navigate moments like this, especially when prejudice played a role. When the attendant returned with a fresh glass of water, Naomi decided to break the silence. What's your name? She asked, her voice gentle. The young man hesitated for a second, then answered, "It's Daniel, ma'am." "Thank you, Daniel," Naomi said, accepting the glass. "And thank you for your professionalism today. I know it hasn't been the easiest morning." Daniel blinked, clearly surprised by her acknowledgement. "It's part of the job, ma'am," he said, though there was a note of gratitude in his voice. Naomi smiled faintly. "It may be part of the job, but situations like this aren't always easy to handle. I just want you to know it doesn't go unnoticed." Daniel nodded, relief and appreciation flickering across his face. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that." As he stepped away, Naomi watched him for a moment, feeling a flicker of hope. Not everyone turned away from injustice. Some, like Daniel, navigated it quietly but with dignity, even when it wasn't their fight to begin with. In the cockpit, Eric Dalton sat rigid, his hands gripping the controls more tightly than necessary. His mind churned with frustration and unease. He had flown hundreds of flights and dealt with countless high-profile clients, but none had ever made him feel as cornered as Naomi Grant. The faint chime of the intercom jolted Eric Dalton from his thoughts, his grip tightening instinctively on the controls. His co-pilot shot him a questioning glance, but said nothing as Eric pressed the button to accept the call. A firm, no-nonsense voice came through the line. "Captain Dalton, this is Christopher Ellis, CEO of Elite Aviation. We've received a formal report regarding your conduct this morning." Eric's stomach twisted. His hands stiffened against the yoke, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "Mr. Ellis, I can explain." "You'll have the opportunity to explain during a formal inquiry," Ellis interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "For now, consider this a direct order. Upon landing in Zurich, you are to report to the local office for an immediate review. Until then, conduct yourself with the utmost professionalism." Eric swallowed, his face pale as the weight of the words sank in. "Yes, sir," he muttered. The line clicked dead, leaving an oppressive silence in the cockpit. Eric stared straight ahead, but the usual clarity he found in flying felt distant. His thoughts churned, spiraling around the growing realization that this wasn't just a scolding. It was accountability, something he had long avoided. Unaware of the unfolding conversation above, Naomi Grant remained seated in the cabin, her focus shifting back to her tablet. She reviewed the final details of her presentation, the numbers and projections grounding her in what she did best: building. But the morning's events lingered at the edges of her mind, replaying in fragments. Eric Dalton's behavior was more than just a personal affront. It was a reminder of the silent, exhausting battles she had fought throughout her career. Each confrontation like this one wasn't just about her. It was about all the others who faced the same invisible barriers. The soft hum of the jet accompanied her thoughts, the clouds parting below as they soared closer to Zurich. Naomi allowed herself a small exhale, settling into the quiet determination that had always driven her forward. This wasn't over, but she was ready for whatever came next. The sky stretched endlessly, a vast canvas of possibility. Justice, she reminded herself, had already begun its work. Her job was simply to stay the course. The descent into Zurich was smooth, the jet gliding through crisp mountain air. The distant Alps, snow-capped and formidable, loomed against the horizon, a reflection of resilience and strength. Naomi gazed out at the landscape, letting the scene wash over her. The view was a stark contrast to the turbulence of the day. As the jet touched down with a faint bump, a sense of closure settled over her, but not finality. This wasn't the end. It was just another step in the journey. The jet taxied to a halt. Moments later, Daniel, the flight attendant, appeared by Naomi's side. "Miss Grant," he said quietly, his voice calm but carrying something else, gratitude, perhaps admiration. "Welcome to Zurich. It's been a pleasure serving you." Naomi looked up, her expression warm. "Thank you, Daniel. Your professionalism hasn't gone unnoticed. Keep it up, and you'll go far." Daniel's smile, faint at first, grew with a flicker of pride. "Thank you, ma'am. Safe travels." As Naomi gathered her belongings, preparing to disembark, her gaze caught Eric standing near the cockpit door. His expression was rigid, discomfort clear in the way his eyes flicked toward the ground. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with a slight incline of her head, Naomi broke the silence. "Captain Dalton," she said evenly, her tone neutral but firm, "I trust this flight has been a learning experience for you." Eric's jaw tightened, but he nodded slightly. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice subdued. Naomi regarded him for a moment longer, but said nothing else. Turning, she stepped off the jet, the brisk Swiss air meeting her as she descended the stairs. Waiting on the tarmac was a sleek black car, a small but tangible reminder of what she had built through determination and grit. As the car pulled away from the airport, the city of Zurich unfolded around her, old-world charm meeting modern elegance. Cobblestone streets wove between towering office buildings and high-end boutiques. Naomi leaned back in the leather seat, letting the city pass by as her thoughts shifted forward. The meeting ahead was important, but echoes of the morning still lingered. Arriving at the conference center, she spotted Marcus Reed waiting at the entrance. His easy demeanor and broad smile were a welcome sight. "Naomi," he said, embracing her briefly, "you made it." "Barely," Naomi replied with a wry smile, "but I'm here." Marcus's expression shifted, growing more serious. "I heard from Ellis. They're taking the incident seriously. Eric Dalton's career with elite aviation might not last much longer." Naomi nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "Good? It's about accountability, Marcus. Not just for him, but for anyone who thinks they can treat others like they don't belong." "You're right," Marcus said, admiration in his voice. "And if anyone can make sure change happens, it's you." Naomi smiled faintly, grateful for his confidence, but knowing this was only the beginning. Marcus Reed's tone grew serious. "I heard from the aviation company's CEO. They're taking the incident seriously. Eric Dalton won't be flying under their banner much longer." Naomi Grant nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "Good," she said quietly. "It's about accountability, Marcus. Not just for him, but for anyone who believes they can treat others as less than." "You're right," Marcus replied, admiration clear in his voice. "And if anyone can make sure that change happens, it's you." The meeting in Zurich was a resounding success. Naomi's presentation captivated the audience, securing the partnership that would expand her company's reach into new markets. But as she left the conference center that evening, her mind wasn't on profits or growth. Her thoughts lingered on the quiet victories of the day. Eric Dalton's actions had been a stark reminder that prejudice still cast long shadows. But elite aviation's swift response and Naomi's refusal to let the incident slide had begun to turn the tide. Justice, she reminded herself, wasn't about retribution. It was about creating lasting change. It was about ensuring that the next person wouldn't have to fight the same battles. Later that night, Naomi stood by the window of her hotel room, gazing out at the lights of Zurich, twinkling against the dark sky. The day had been long and challenging, but it had also reaffirmed her strength. She wasn't just flying toward her goals, she was soaring beyond the obstacles that once threatened to hold her back. The phone on the bedside table buzzed softly. A message from Marcus appeared on the screen. "Marcus, you handled today with your usual brilliance. Proud of you as always. Dinner tomorrow?" Naomi smiled as she typed a quick reply. "Naomi, thank you, Marcus. And yes, dinner sounds perfect." Setting the phone down, Naomi exhaled, allowing a rare sense of peace to settle over her. The battle wasn't over, but she had won today. And tomorrow she would keep fighting. Not just for herself, for everyone who deserved the chance to fly as high as their dreams could take them. Weeks later, a memo circulated within elite aviation. It announced Eric Dalton's dismissal and the introduction of new diversity and sensitivity training for all staff. The incident with Naomi Grant didn't make headlines or become public scandal, but it became a case study within the industry. It wasn't seen as a controversy. It was remembered as a turning point, a moment when accountability triumphed over complacency. Naomi's story, though private, became an unspoken example of how resilience and unwavering resolve could dismantle even the deepest-rooted biases. For Naomi, it was more than a victory. It was a reminder. The sky wasn't the limit. It was just the beginning. And so this story ends with a clear message. Prejudice and ignorance will always meet accountability. Naomi's determination not only secured her rightful place, but sparked a ripple of change, proving that standing up for justice can reshape the world around us. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Join us for more powerful stories that challenge stereotypes, highlight resilience, and celebrate justice. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.